couples, and I'm ready to learn more about that and to introduce our listeners to some more of that information.
For sure.
Yeah. So why don't we just kind of start with what got you two into the field respectively, and we'll kind of start there and see where the conversation goes.
Sure.
If you'd like to
Do
start
you want
with.
to go first?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a social worker, and I'm not sure how much everybody is introduced to the fields of the different mental health, but I got my bachelor's in social work from the University of, Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, and then got my master's at UT Arlington. And when I was in my undergrad, I remember talking to people and being like, I don't really know what I want to do, my freshman, sophomore year, but I just know I want to help people. That's was kind of my tagline. I just want to help people. And someone said, well, that's social work. I'm like, okay, sure. So I signed up for a social work 101 class or whatever it was, and was like, oh, I remember the professor wrote all of the jobs that a social worker can do on the whiteboard, and I was like, oh my God, I would love every single one of those. So, then once I graduated, kind of realized that I couldn't do any of those fun things unless I got my master's. So went forward to get my master's and my license, and just as I kept learning about the field, just continually fell in love with it.
Nice.
And my mother is a psychologist. She's been a therapist for my whole life. And so I was kind of familiar with therapy and what that was. And I was in therapy as a young man and found it very valuable and went, oh, okay, this is a thing that's really important and cool. And so went and got my undergrad in psychology. And then not much you can do with just an undergrad in psychology. So
Sure.
Master's it was.
Yeah. And did you two meet through the field? I don't want to dive too much into your guys' relationships, but since we're going to be talking about relationships.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah, so we met in the 7th grade.
Oh, wow.
I'm originally from Texas. Beth is from Arizona, but I lived in Arizona at the time. We met at Granite Mountain Middle School.
Yeah.
And never dated. We were just friends for the longest until junior year of college.
Yeah.
I finally asked her to date, and she said no.
There you go.
And then I asked 3 more times, and then finally it was like, yes. So.
Nice.
Well, starting to date someone that you've been really good friends with your whole life is kind of a big ask, So, but yeah, it just was interesting that we both ended up being interested in the same field, because I was already studying social work, he was already studying psychology, without having ever really talked about that. But now, as you can imagine, our dinner table conversations are very interesting.
I would imagine. Yeah. And now you guys are helping couples navigate these things as well. And I know our listenership is going to be really interested in this topic because we haven't in the last couple months talked too much about couples therapy. But what do you guys both sit down with the couples when you guys are doing the work?
Absolutely. Usually later in the process, when we start out, and because there's 2 of us, we find it's really valuable to start kind of split up. And originally we thought that, I would take the man and Beth would take the woman in the relationship, but we've had really good time doing the opposite of that. And just meeting individually for a while and really getting a therapeutic alliance with one of us before getting all 4 of us together in the room really creates a space that, we found is a lot different than having just a solo practitioner in the room with a couple.
Yeah.
I think so often in couples therapy, it's easy for the therapist, even without realizing it, to align with one of the members of the couple. If there's a specific strife and it's like, okay, well, you're the one that messed up in this, we're just all humans and that can come out. And so having it in such a way that, he is able to know one of the partners more their backstory, things like that, and then me knowing the other one, then we're able to kind of bring that in whenever we all come together in a session and are able to, I can kind of be the advocate for my guy and he, just kind of as we navigate these conversations of, hey, remember we talked about this at one point, and so it's been really helpful to kind of feel like they have somebody that's on their team sitting in the room, no matter what, kind of,
Yeah.
And then we can model as well. So.
And these are very durable, by the way.
Oh, okay.
You know, you could, I mean, we probably don't want to smack them around. I probably shouldn't say, chance, I shouldn't say that, but you can bump them.
Well, I realize I talk with my hands a lot.
Yeah. Oh, me too. I'm always bumping this. But those alliances too, you know, it's not something you think about often when you're talking about couples therapy, but if you've ever been in the room with a couple, there's always that pull for triangulation. There's always the pull for be on my side.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you kind of are already, both of you, touching on like how you're breaking that down, but just for those who may not have ever been in therapy, or maybe they're not having the best time with their therapist right now, what are some of the things that you guys do to kind of help bring the compassion in and guide people through not taking sides and staying as a united front as a couple?
Ooh, big question. Do you have a direction on that?
A little bit, yeah. I think that, you know, it's kind of important that just like you face any person that you're talking to in therapy, you want to offer validation and you want to offer normalization of their experience and you know, things like that. And I think that it's important, you know, as the practitioner to be sitting there and saying, you both typically, you know, have very important things that you want to contribute to this conversation. They're both valid. You both are coming from different places, you know, within your own lived experience, and both are usually valid. And, you know, so making sure that we're kind of like equally letting each person talk and you know, offering that validation to each of them. And I know one of the things that he always says that's brilliant is, you know, you're often not fighting about what you think you're fighting about. And he really, like, people are always like, what are you talking about? You know? And so kind of knock them off their, like, game a little bit. I'm like, what do you mean? You know? And then getting them to try to dive deeper a little bit.
Yeah. You want to speak a little more to that, Luke?
Ooh, it's just such a place that we regularly return to with couples that we're fighting about. He never puts the toilet paper back. And it's really never about the toilet paper. And really, even if he magically started putting the toilet paper back, it wouldn't solve the problem of what that actually communicates to your partner, that I don't value you, I don't whatever, is kind of in the message for your partner is the thing that we're fighting about. And so let's skip talking about the toilet paper. Let's talk about the message that comes up in y'all's relationship when this fight occurs. And then we so easily trigger each other and our partners when we've been with them for a long time. And we just get lost in the mess of talking about toilet paper when that was never really the fight.
Yeah. Where do you guys think that comes from? Like, where are people learning to fight or argue in these ways? And there's no right or wrong answer, obviously.
I was
We
going to
know
say,
that.
we could probably argue about that one.
Yeah.
I go to a generational place with that. There's definitely a lot of family of origin stuff and living out the way that we were parented in our relationships and then reliving out that relationship in our parenting and then generational trauma.
Yeah. And I think it also takes a lot of personal introspection to try to figure out what it actually is that you're upset about, you know, whether it's just how you're going about your day or how you're interacting with your partner, you know. And so oftentimes, you know, we'll be talking to people and it's kind of like what he was saying, like, this is the thing that I'm upset about. And it's kind of sussing out, like, you have to kind of peel back what you are thinking you're upset about and kind of what's the emotion behind that, what are you trying to communicate to your partner that's coming out in this way? And that's usually how you can kind of dig it out.
Yeah. Introspection. That's a big word that I imagine many couples would need to take a deeper look at.
Yes.
Yeah.
For the audience, you know, the three of us, when we hear introspection, it's like, well, yeah, we deal with these words every day. But for those who might not know what introspection kind of entails, why don't we take a look at that for a moment and give a quick definition and then dive back into couples therapy?
For sure. I mean, introspection can mean different things to different people, kind of like mindfulness can. But in some way, it's being really aware of your own experience and your own emotions and kind of your own approach to whatever situation is going on, and being able to kind of take a look at the way that you're approaching this situation.
And why you're approaching it in that way. You know, maybe you're having even in our relationship, we talk about this sometimes of, you know, okay, I'm overly emotional right now because of whatever's happening in my environment. Maybe I had a bad day at work, or the kids kept me up all night, or, whatever it may be. And to like just take a step back and be like, okay, is this situation that we're fighting about actually as big of a deal as it feels in this moment? And being able to reflect on yourself, that's just an example. Reflect on yourself and say, okay, maybe this isn't as big of a deal as I'm feeling it is right now. Maybe if we come back to this later, it's not actually going to be as much of a problem, but just kind of like taking a moment to stop and check yourself and, okay, what am I actually upset about? What am I looking for from my partner? And how do I think that we can even go about that?
Yeah. And when these individuals are coming to you, and then is it they're coming from individual referrals and then they're wanting to do the couples work, or are you guys kind of getting referrals of couples directly that are coming to you for this work? I'm sure it's a mix of both. But
A mix of both. I have personally been surprised by the number of times we've started individual work with someone and then they've gone, holy cow, I need to get my partner in on this. And that's one of the unique strengths of being able to do joint clinician work is once you've started as, oh, I'm your therapist, and now we try to bring this into couples space, that can get a little tricky, especially with the partner that's joining and going, oh, well, you have this history with my partner. But instead, if we get to insert a new person and go, okay, well, now she's your therapist, and we all come together to do the couples work, that's a unique relationship to be able to kind of jump over that a little bit.
Yeah, it's rare, I mean, you don't hear it every day that there are practices where this, I mean, we know it exists, but it's nice to be able to sit down and pick your guys' brains a little bit, because I have my preconceived notions about couples work in general, and you guys are actually touching on one of them. Just to out myself a little bit, is like when I'm working with an individual and they want to bring their loved one in, right, or they want to do couples work, 'cause I work with 12-steppers a lot, and it's if your partner's not doing their work, I don't really want to go in there with you.
Totally. Yeah.
Can be, like you guys are kind of touching on, can be messy when the whole system isn't taking that work towards introspection.
Well, and kind of like, what you're alluding to as well is, everybody still has to be committed to the process or it's not going to work. If one party is like, well, I really don't even want to be here, then okay, well, you're not, you can't do therapy with somebody that doesn't want to be there, whether it's a couple or an individual, so it's fun, honestly, to see the people kind of come alive of like, okay, no, I really want to figure out why this is such a problem for me, and I really want it to work in my relationship, and so why am I doing this? Why is this upsetting my partner? Like, what can we really do? And that's so much fun because then we get to just kind of help them to build that.
Yeah. And was this a moment of like one day Luke rolled over and said, we should do couples therapy together?
It was one of my outpatient clients.
Yeah.
And I had been working with her for a while. We had a few months together, and a lot of stuff kept coming up in the relationship that she went, oh my goodness, like we need to do some couples work. And my first thought was, well, okay, let me refer you guys out to somebody because I'm not bringing a partner into this complicated space. And then I went, well, hang on. I can refer you to Beth. She's at home right now. We'll just do that. And so that kind of happened organically, and then we went, well, what does couples therapy look like? Well, dang, I guess we need to get a babysitter because we're both coming in here at the same time now. And then it just went fabulously, and we were like, oh, we didn't even realize this unique thing that we had being two married therapists, and it's been great.
Yeah.
Because I think that like having two therapists in the room with you is unique in and of itself, but then having two therapists that are married to each other, also adds another layer that we're able to provide, even like I said, just with validation and stuff of like, they're complaining about something, I can say, oh yeah, we had that conversation last week, this is, you guys are, you're not totally broken. This is what we're going to talk about. And, everybody goes through this kind of, or whatever it may be.
I was going to ask you too about that too, just like the normalization of modeling your guys' relationship. We know unconsciously is happening the whole time for them, but also just kind of pulling that as our best tool in the room. And I imagine that would be powerful. It's like, here we are, two married therapists, but also we're just human beings, and this is normal what you guys are going through.
Absolutely. It's kind of the funniest inside joke when we hear their story about that thing that we used to fight about. And we give each other that look of like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like uniquely, I have great insight on this.
I actually know exactly how you feel.
When you two are coming in there together and you've got your client you've been working with and your client you've been working with, do you find it's a natural unfolding into the rapport that's being built on either side?
Absolutely. And one of the most powerful is when you're listening to your guy really try to say what he's feeling and kind of bombing, and you get to jump in and go, okay, hang on, this is what you're trying to get to, is that right? And they go, oh my God, thank you, yes, this is what I'm saying. And really, both them and their partner love that moment of clarity and, okay, here's the communication we've been looking for. And that's really only a thing that we can establish with each individual before we all come into the room together.
Yeah.
And it's kind of delicate because there oftentimes, you know, when you're sitting with your therapist, you're in an individual session, you're complaining about your partner, maybe you're asking for advice or whatever it may be, you know, and or just sharing your life story, things about you that maybe you haven't shared with your partner, or maybe you haven't brought up with your partner yet, or you know, something. And so there's always a little bit of a debrief that I liked to do prior to session of like, hey, you know, how much of this do you want to get into? And the best answer is always everything, you know, because then I can say, hey, you know, last week we talked about, remember that thing with your mom, you know, and you think that that's maybe playing in with your relationship right now, or, you know, and, you know, oh my God, I didn't even think about that, you know, but like, yeah, I know about your mom already. And you know, we can.
Yeah. It's always the mom.
Freud would be proud.
Yeah. Are there anything that like pop into your guys' heads of, I wouldn't have expected this, like to learn this about my clients in the context of couples therapy, that, you know, is just, I won't say like mind blowing, but I may not have thought about this, and sitting down as two clinicians who are married, gaining a new perspective on therapy for your guys' perspectives?
Great question. And for me, it is a question of countertransference. And one of my mentors in the therapy world is really big on the countertransference between a clinician and being able to use that as a tool and in a way take on the kind of problems and emotions of our clients, and within our own relatively intact egos, kind of resolve that a little bit and give it back to them. And that's a very unique thing that a couple can do, is kind of take on the problems and the emotions of that relationship, resolve it between our relatively intact egos and relationship, and then kind of give that back to them. And that kind of idea has been mind-blowing to me. I don't think that it's a thing I've really even read about.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
We'll take a moment here, just for those, again, who aren't clinicians. Let's describe countertransference a little bit so they can join us in what you were describing, because it really is powerful what you just shared.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of that particularly either.
I was surprised by it. And in a typical one-on-one kind of sense, countertransference is that feeling of, oftentimes it's a thing new therapists are warned against, that it's an over-alignment sometimes. It's a thing that kicks you out of your clinical mind maybe and kind of resonates with your personal emotions, where maybe if you had kind of a deadbeat dad in your childhood and you're sitting in front of a patient that's talking about their deadbeat dad and you go, oh, wow, that kind of resonates with me in a way that's maybe not helpful clinically if you let it run away from you, or if you can use that in a very clinical way to really further your compassion for the person and draw from your own experiences. Well, here's how you're going to walk through this emotionally, and I know because I've done it. And that's not a thing that we say as therapists, but it's a very valuable internal tool.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we're humans too. And so when we're interacting with you, our patient who is also a human, you know, we're going to have emotional responses to things that you say. You know, we're not actually robots. And actually it makes us better therapists, that kind of like what he's talking about, if we're not just robots, you know. Of course, we're not going to like, well, you're so mad and now I'm so mad, you know, but kind of just recognizing basically countertransference is just the feelings that come up in the therapist, which is a human emotion.
Yeah, and I'm sure you two would agree, but the field has advanced a lot when we're not just the blank slate sitting behind
For sure.
writing down what they're saying.
Totally.
You know, it's like my therapist always tells me, you are the best tool you have access to in the room. Right?
Yeah.
Keep it sharp, keep it healthy, keep it ready to use.
I love that.
Yeah, she's great. Her name's Sharon. She's wonderful.
Thanks,
I love her
Sharon.
to death.
Shout out Sharon.
Yeah. And you guys practice in what city with the couples therapy?
Primarily Garland. We do a lot of virtual. We don't really have an in-person office because we just moved
Right
to
now,
Garland recently, and then had a couple of kids. So virtual is a space that we fit in pretty well right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there visions to eventually expand this and get into some of those rooms?
Absolutely, yes. Probably not when we have 2 under 2.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
this is recent. You have a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, you guys were talking about them messing around with each other a little bit before. I won't get too deep into what you guys were joking about, but it's funny. Kids are funny.
It is. They are hilarious. Yeah. So it's kind of a lot to balance. I mean, because like what we mentioned earlier, we both have our individual careers, kind of in totally separate fields from marriage counseling. And then we're able to do this, couples counseling, and then we're able to do this on the side as well, whenever we can, when life permits. That right now, it is, we have our personal life is pretty crazy.
Yeah, you guys are busy.
Yes.
Is it married couples that you're working with a lot? Do you guys do premarital therapy, things like that, or just haven't kind of gotten into that yet? Or
We haven't gotten to. We would love to. We talk about doing premarital all the time.
We want to write a book for
You
premarital
should.
counseling.
We really haven't had any come across yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Just
too
couples in
do.
general, yeah.
You guys have a unique dynamic and perspective as 2 married therapists. It's like you should write a book.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
One day,
when
that's
you
on the
do,
list.
One day.
We'll bring you back on to talk about it.
Yeah.
when you
There
do.
we go.
Yeah.
We'll grow the humans, and then we'll write the book, and then we'll get
Yeah.
our PhDs. And
One day at a
Yeah.
time. Yeah. So what kind of compels you guys to further this? And I know we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but people are always kind of jumping in and leaving and coming back, so they might have missed. But what compels you guys to work with the couple to break down these dynamics? What are they getting out of this when they come and sit down with you guys? And maybe they don't always report back to you, but I'm sure some of them have.
Yeah.
I think especially early on, it's bulk tools. I mean, it's us reestablishing communication patterns, and in a way where definitely step one is always, let's stop these fights from running away from ourselves. And once we've gotten that, I think then we move more into, I don't know, what would you call phase 2?
Well, what I wanted to expand on a little bit is how to fight is something that, I mean, I'm sure in your work that you have that conversation, but how to fight is a surprisingly big conversation, because so often we'll be talking to people and they're, okay, this is like, so explain to me what happened on Tuesday, that they're wanting to talk about. And okay, well, I said this, and then she said this, and then I said this, and then he left and I got mad, and then I, whatever. And it's like, okay, so that whole fight didn't net you anything, like you both just got upset, but no work was actually done, so kind of coaching people on how to use introspection and kind of say, okay, this is what I am communicating, this is what I'm needing from you, instead of just letting it turn into, I mean, it's a skill. It is. Learning how to fight is a skill, especially with your partner. This is a person that you love. This is a person that you value theoretically more than anybody else, and you want to come to a place of agreement with them, but so often when you're heated in the moment, it's hard to recall that and lean on that, so we always say, pull back a little bit, recognize that y'all are fighting a problem instead of y'all fighting each other. And I think that's kind of a big, it seems simple when you say it, but it is kind of like, it's a big mindset shift in a lot of couples.
I think there's a lot of people, right? And I've worked with a lot of people. I can attest to this. We don't get taught how to fight fair, how to fight in a healthy way.
For
And I was
sure.
going to ask this question tonight as I was thinking about couples therapy, but I'm hearing that the contention and the belief that you guys hold is that fighting is normal as long as we're fighting in healthy ways. And I always like to kind of bring it to a point of like, it kind of moves with the skill more towards like we have disagreements and
Yeah.
arguments, but largely we're not fighting each other. We're more so fighting a problem. And I'm curious if that's some of the similar beliefs.
Absolutely. And I think about all the time. I was probably 17 or 18 in therapy at one point and meeting a new therapist, and he asked me how I was dating some girl at the time. And how is that? Oh, good. We fight a normal amount. And he went, what's a normal amount? So I don't know, a normal amount. Don't you fight with your partner? And he was like, no, I never fight with my partner. And I thought about it for weeks. I literally went to people and I was like, hey, this guy's full of it, right? Like, you don't never fight with your partner. But no, they don't fight. They have disagreements. They talk through things. They have conversations about it. It's never a knockdown, drag out fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a perspective worth obviously talking about in this discussion while we have two couples therapists with us. But I would, at that age, would have stopped too, because I was just used to seeing it.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, this is just the way it is, you know, which is obviously the piece that we were touching on earlier with like a lot of these things are learned generationally from our caregivers. This is just the way it's done. And that's a lot of people. You know, I mean, we won't have any shortage of referrals for a while.
No, definitely not. And there's just so much in our cultural lexicon that we believe this is the way that things go. And a phrase we love to use because of the shock factor is go to bed angry. Because we so hear the opposite. Everybody will tell young couples, don't ever go to bed angry. And it was actually a piece of advice from my grandmother when we got married. And at the time, we were kind of like, oh, she's so old and crazy. And the more we thought about it and have started to implement it in our lives as newlyweds, we went, okay, no, there's something to that, because you're definitely going to be angry about some stuff that by the time you go to bed and wake up again, you're going to go, I wasn't all that angry about that after all. Maybe we didn't need to fight until 2 a.m. about the toilet paper. Maybe we could have gone to bed and come back tomorrow as maybe our better selves a little bit.
Yeah.
And allowing yourself time to reflect, I think, is always valuable, is kind of, but, you know, and it's kind of, I mean, there's nuance, of course, in go to bed angry, because, of course, we don't mean like, you know, you're going to go get your separate places and you're going to be, you know, and just be mad at your partner. You know, it's always important, and we like to say, to kind of reiterate your goal or like your mission statement, basically, for your relationship within these conversations, these fights, you know, of like, I love you, I'm not leaving you, and I want to work this out. I am mad right now, and this is, you know, we're going to talk about it tomorrow. Okay, great. You know, now we've addressed maybe an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment, and we're going to be able to move forward and reflect in our own space, and then be able to come back together knowing that we still have the mission of reconciliation.
Yeah. Yeah, always moving back to the relationship, to the unit. And that was a big one that I had to learn early on too, and that I work with my clients on in an individual capacity. Is you can't just tell someone like, peace, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Right? If you're gonna step away, you got to give them a time frame, and then you got to be back
Yeah.
at that time frame.
Yeah.
You know, or be prepared for your partner to feel abandoned.
Yeah.
You know, and that skill, it's not astonishing to me now, but I think, you know, as you start to navigate into these realms, it always feels a little bit jarring of like how many people just, they would never think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Their mode of operation is, if you wrong me, it's
I'm out,
over.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes actually, I mean, it doesn't seem like it, but that's like the easy way out almost, you know, like if I'm upset, I'm just going to leave, I'm going to remove myself. That's actually way easier than saying, you know, okay, no, I'm going to figure out, you know, what I need, try to communicate that, and then allow my partner space while I take space for us to come back to it, you know, instead of just like, okay, well, I'm done, you know, which is so often, you know, that'll, like you said, leads to abandonment issues. And that, I mean, most of us, I think, could, you know, feel like we've had abandonment issues at different times in our lives. And so pretty much always that's going to hit somebody where it hurts
Yeah.
if you leave, you know.
Yeah, if you're human on this earth.
Right, yeah.
You're going to feel some kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah. It moves us towards, I think, if we want to tackle maybe a bigger conversation in the therapeutic settings of like, I know the three of us, just kind of getting to know the two of you in this conversation, wouldn't advocate for separations or leaving relationships so directly, but what do the two of you kind of hold in your beliefs or in the work of when a couple just kind of isn't working
Yeah.
out?
Well, and not necessarily, actually. You know, I wouldn't say that I don't advocate for separating or for, you know, divorce if that's what you need to do. I think that in the conversation we've had, it's been, and I did want to reiterate this a minute ago, of like both partners have to be present and willing to be working on the relationship. If it's just one person, or if neither of them are really into it, it's not where everybody's wasting their time. You know what I mean? Sometimes couples are better off not together, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I wouldn't say that it's our thought process that we, you know, always want reconciliation.
Right.
Sometimes people don't want reconciliation, and that is totally okay. You know, if you both do, though, we're going to get it. You know, that's great.
Yeah. The willingness.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know, it's the same like when I work with 12-steppers. If you don't want to get sober, brother, you
Totally.
know,
It's not
then
gonna
you're not
happen.
going to get
go
sober.
outside.
Yeah.
You know, run around in the
Try
sun.
again
then.
later. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I like that perspective, and I can just hear it as we're unfolding in this conversation and the work you guys do, is that if the willingness is there, we're here to help you do the work.
Yeah.
If the willingness isn't on one end or the other, we're going to uncover that. And it's better to figure that out now.
Right.
All right, let's get in front of this.
Yeah. And there's never any judgment in that. Sometimes
Yeah.
couples come to couples counseling for permission to separate. And if that's what they need from us as clinicians, we're happy to give you that. If that's a growth area that you need to both lovingly and kind of ethically separate, okay.
Yeah, there's the way you put that. That's not a way you're going to hear that very often.
No.
Not in our society.
Not at all.
Yeah. What do you think is it? Well, I mean, we know what the narrative is, but what do you think the narrative actually is when the lay public is talking about separations and divorce? And I know it's kind of a heavy one, but
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah,
lot
I mean,
of narratives out there.
Of course, there's a lot of stigma, you know, around a separation. And I think that it's just like you would with individual counseling, that it's like a case by case basis of, you know, trying to suss out, okay, when you come to me initially, what are you saying that your problems are? What are you saying that your goals are? Cool. And then also, is there more that we don't know about? Is there more that you want to get to? Is there more, you know, what are your goals individually? And I think also in our modality that we have with meeting with people individually first, that you're able to kind of suss some of that stuff out and really kind of feel out people's motivations before you even get in the room and in front of the couple unit. And also seeing what they look like with their partner versus by themselves, if they're totally, you know, if they're just as comfortable, or a totally different kind of version.
Or
But,
if the secretary comes back out and like,
right,
all right.
right, yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's a lot of stigma, but I think that at the end of the day, all of us as individuals need to do what's best for our own mental health, for our own boundaries, for our own families, you know. And often I think that, you know, if you're married, especially if you're married, but even if you're unmarried, you know, and if you're at a place that you're coming to couples counseling, you may be already one foot in the door of, you know, we want to fix this, and this is something that's good for me, you know. And so, okay, well, if that's the goal, then working towards that. And if it's not, like you said, that's also okay. But let's figure out why, so that you can leave with an understanding of, okay, I did everything that I needed to do. This is what's healthy for me. This is what's healthy for my partner, and kind of move forward. It's just, just approaching every situation case by case, just like you would with an individual, you know?
Yeah. Getting a sense of where they're at specifically. And, you know, when I was listening, I was thinking of like what the deal breakers are, right? As well as like, are these red flags things that you can put up with? The way I've always kind of looked at it since being in therapy and being a therapist is, if they do this thing and it annoys me, would I still choose them a million times over?
Yeah.
And if not, you got to get yourself out.
Right.
And I think for those maybe who are married and listening to this, that's a hard pill to
Totally.
swallow. I could only imagine, right, the emotions that come with that when you hit that point of realizing that I'm not coming back from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happened before. It wasn't a couple we were with together, but a couple I was seeing as part of my day job that eventually you get them separate and husband just goes, "Oh, dude, I've wanted out for years. I just don't know how." You go, "Okay, well then let's figure that out." That's now the goal of couples counseling. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's refreshing for me to, hear the perspective as well, because, working with individuals, there's a lot of conversations that happen about the relationships, and just being able to check back in with boots on the ground couples therapists of like, yeah, it's okay to go work on that goal.
Yeah.
I need that reminder, because sometimes I'm like, oh, well, maybe let's unpack this a little bit more. It's like you're always trying to get deeper. And sometimes it's like that would be the next doorway that opens the deeper work, right? Because you never know when an individual is like, I'm done. You don't know what the depth of the work will look like when they've really aligned with what their personal needs are.
Right. And I think at the end of the day, just kind of in the most simplistic way, as therapists, it's our job to help our patients become the best version of themselves and to reach that potential, reach the goals that they're looking for. So who are we to impart our own, this is what I think is best for you, and actually we have a story about that too, about a therapist that spent most of the time talking in a session versus, letting us talk, when we were early on married. And so, but it's, seeing the person, hearing what their goals are, and then my job is just to help you get there, whatever it is,
Yeah. I had a client this week, and I won't take too much time on this, speaking of letting you guys talk, but I had a client this week I've been working with for like 4 years, and she's in recovery, and her wife, who was also struggling with substances, finally has started going to program and finally gets into therapy, and then she comes to her wife and says, well, my therapist says your therapist is full of shit, and AA doesn't work, and my client was cracking up. She's like, I was just thinking about what your response would be, and I'm sitting there like, cool. Yeah. But
My
it's just,
therapist can beat up your therapist.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's like, and who knows how much of that is true, but it's funny. I like the point that you make. And for those who are listening to this show, because a lot of our listeners they're interested in therapy. They're either in it or they're looking for therapists. And that message that you guys are clearly linking across here to them, which is whatever your goals are, just come in. Our job is to help you sort that out. It's not personal for us.
Right.
I may be ready to fight for you,
Right.
at a certain point,
Right.
if you're bought in and you're willing, but I'm not actually going to go fight anybody. So let's just do the work. Let's
Right.
sit and talk.
Right. And that doesn't mean that we're permissive of, behaviors that are not good for you or whatever. We're going to call you on it if you need to be called on it,
Yeah.
But that's a part of helping you reach, where you're trying to be. Okay, you say that, for example, you say you want to be sober, and I do a lot of work in substance abuse as well. So you say you want to be sober. Okay, great. But you're going to the bar just to hang out with your friends, Okay, well, I'm going to call you on that. That's probably not a good behavior if you've been sober for 15 seconds. And so, let's talk about that. This is what you want, so this is how we're going to get there,
Yeah. The brutal honesty, especially with 12-steppers in the beginning, it's so important, Honesty just in general, and we talk about that a lot on this show. It's like without that, you're not getting very far down the road.
Right.
And in therapy, it's going to come out. And that's something maybe to be prepared for, and I'm sure you guys would second as well. It's like if you're going to walk into those rooms, be prepared to be honest and know you're not going to be judged. And if you feel judged, I always tell my clients, just let me know.
Tell me, because that's actually great. We can talk about that.
Yeah. What was it about how or what I said that made you feel judged? If I can work on that, great. To maybe meet you where you're at, and if it really just doesn't feel like a fit,
right,
we can get you to someone that maybe doesn't make you feel that way.
And also looking at, okay, the feeling that you're feeling is judgment. Maybe what else is going on? Maybe are you projecting from what others have put on you before? Is making you feel judged by me? I'm not judging you. But do you feel judged by your dad, who always tells you that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing? Whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And just like, okay, let's explore that emotion. If you can't share what you're feeling, then we can't do anything with it,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing how often, when you're doing the deep work, that comes up. And then also it's like, what's funny is like, I'll work with alcoholics, and every once in a while I have a really strict 90-day sobriety. Like you could call it a rule, but really just a boundary.
Yeah.
And every once in a blue moon, they'll get real crafty and they'll slip through the cracks of my
Right.
intake. And they're real ready to confront, like, it's just their raw ego, and it's funny how much that is easy to detect in our sessions when you're really paying attention.
Yeah.
And I imagine with two of you in the room, it's just like, there it is.
Yeah. Which is great. I mean, it's can be scary, but it's like we can't work with a thing that's not there, So let's put it out there, and then we can actually deal with it. Yeah.
If someone is tuning in and listening to a conversation about therapy for the first time, what would you two want them to know about couples therapy, individual therapy? We've been kicking that around a lot tonight, but let's say they're looking into this for the first time. What would your guys' individual perspectives be on what they might need to hear from you?
For me, I'm like, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. You should just go do it. Like, you should go do it. It feels so scary. And what's kind of funny for me and my personal story is, like I shared in the beginning with my undergrad, and, I got my bachelor's in social work, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a social worker. And I learned about all these jobs and did all these things. I never personally myself sat in front of a therapist until I was already most of the way through grad school. And, because I was like, well, that's kind of scary. I don't know. Okay, well, Beth, if this is what you're going to do, like, how are you supposed to have others trust you to sit down if you're not willing to go do the same thing, Also, something that I would say is that and it's unfortunate, but it's in every field, there are good therapists and there are bad therapists. Or rather, therapists that you will click with, therapists that you won't, is maybe a nicer way to say it. But
That's
also
very charitable.
There are also bad therapists.
Yes.
Just like doctors or, whatever else, people that cut your hair, things that you may come across. So if it's not working and you're not feeling it, just, okay, that's okay, And it's hard because you're like, man, I just poured my whole soul out to this person and it's really not working, and now I need to pull back and then try to trust another person, and that's so vulnerable, and it can feel so scary to now open yourself back up again. But doing that, like being willing to do it until you find somebody that's, and I don't think you'll go through 10 therapists or anything before but if there's one that's not working, maybe do a little more research, read up on them a little bit more, do a consultation call first, things like that, to try to help you suss out, is this actually going to be a good fit? And then, when you do have a therapist that you're a good fit with, it's beautiful. I love going to therapy. I went to therapy today. It was amazing. Carissa is the best.
Shout out to Carissa. Yeah. But there's a lot in obviously nuance, but like for the therapist, there's telltale signs. The therapist is canceling a lot, or they're showing up late, or they're taking things personally,
not listening to you.
Bingo. Yeah. And I think it comes back to a point you were touching on as well. And I want to hear your perspective on what they need to hear as well from you. But you had said something earlier of the reasonably intact ego. And so when you're listening to this, as you're shopping for your therapist, it's like, get honest with yourself in the sense of like, am I leaving this therapist for a petty reason or something that I can address emotionally? Or is this really because like this feels really chaotic? And trust your gut a little bit, right? Because there's always going to be those who listen where we would probably all assess and be like, well, let's wait before you trust your gut a little bit, But for those listening, if you can trust your gut and you have a good track record with that, and this therapist is giving you the ick, it's probably okay to trust that.
Yeah. And you mentioned the relatively intact ego, and I think of that when I do give people my one big genuine red flag in therapy. If this happens with your therapist, definitely be thinking about maybe switching therapists. And it has to do with how we as therapists kind of generate this way of speaking where maybe we'll give an interpretation, we'll ask a question, is this what's kind of going on? And if you go, no, I don't think that really fits, and your therapist goes, no, I think that I'm right. that's not therapy anymore. That's not a relatively intact ego. A good therapist, somebody who's in the process with you, will go, okay, fascinating, not really that, so let's try this other thing. And that is good therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't matter what I think works.
Exactly.
It matters what's going to work for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would say, even being on the other side, on the therapist side, when that has happened, of going, okay, there still might be a part of this that they're missing, but maybe they're not ready for it, or maybe the diagnosis is hurtful, or maybe whatever it may be. Okay, let's pull all the way back and see what we need to really look at here, and then maybe I might find out still I'm wrong.
Yeah. It's kind of both of you touching on. It's like, I'm growing as a therapist just as much as you're growing as a client. And,
Totally.
As much as I can say, as I look at my career, like, I stay within my lane. Sometimes a client comes through where it's like, okay, this is a little bit adjacent to my lane.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can do the proper amounts of research. Let me see if I can
Sure.
stay on top of this before I just jump straight to, like, I'll refer them out. Now, I do have my deal breakers of certain types of diagnoses or certain types of individuals. I'm not the right fit. I don't
Sure.
want to work with it. And we all have that. But
Which is a humble thing,
Yeah.
if somebody else can help you out better than I can. Maybe I don't have the experience, or I don't,
Right.
whatever it may be.
yeah, it's there's so many human experiences. I can't treat them
Yeah.
all.
And I would say too, to people that are considering therapy, like, if that does happen to you, don't be scared of, like, oh my God, I'm like really jacked up if this therapist doesn't even
Yeah.
want to work with me. I had an individual that I was working with, that her and her husband went to one session, and she said the therapist fired us after the first session, and he didn't even want to talk to us. And she's like, I must be so messed up that he didn't even, it's like, no, and of course I didn't know that therapist. I wasn't sitting in that room, but like, that therapist maybe just wasn't equipped, or didn't have the experience, or didn't understand the individual needs that you guys have and that y'all have as a couple. And that's okay. There's nobody that's so jacked up that therapy is not going to work for them,
Yeah.
but just, we're all humans interacting with each other. I'm sharing my expertise with you, sitting here listening, and just like you are with me. So if it's not going to work, that's totally fine. And you're still a wonderful human being. We're just, you're going to find somebody that can work better for you.
Yeah. The thread and the through line is what both of you have stated in different ways tonight, is willingness. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter how messed up things are, how bad you feel, and
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
distressed you are. If you're willing to look at it, there's someone out there that can give you the resources to
Totally.
look at it.
Totally. I would say willing and motivated, because willing is step one, and the motivated, I think, is step two.
Yeah. Maybe the motivated starts to become those, like, emotional and spiritual realms, but that would be a whole nother conversation.
Totally.
Chance, how are we doing on time? Yeah, I could feel it in my gut. Trust my gut.
That's a therapist intuition.
I've
an
got the 50-minute hour on lock.
Yup.
Yeah.
Time to do my notes.
I've been told that you were prepped on a question that I ask guests when they come
am I supposed to
brand new on the
tell?
show.
What? Were we supposed to be prepped?
I didn't prep you.
Oh, no.
If we were going to build a mental health amusement park and you two got to build a ride there each individually, what would the ride be? What would it do? What would you call it?
Okay, so I got to prep a little bit.
You got
'cause
to
I
prep
knew-
for this? Oh, what an
man.
insane question. I should have prepped for that.
I know.
All right, you go first.
I know,
Let me
but I
think.
kind of wanted to see what you would come up with off the cuff.
No.
Mine, because I really, and this was actually my first genuine reaction when I heard the question, is that mine, and this is like super dorky. I don't know how other people answer this really, but mine would be called Progress. Okay, it's a roller coaster, right? And it's relatively upwards, but there's several drops and maybe some plateaus where you go for a little bit. It's really not a very fun roller coaster. You end up at the top, and you still reach your goal, but it's not. I think it would emulate that. So often people think that, like, this is where I am and this is where I want to be and this is the direct path, but that's almost never how it works out. There's almost always, oh, here's a relapse, or oh, I fell back into some behaviors, or in couples, I treated my partner in this way that I said I wasn't going to, or I, handled this situation without, consulting him or, whatever it may be. Okay, well, that's okay. That's okay. You're not off the ride yet, right? I'm still on the ride and it's actually still going up. And now maybe we're sitting here for a little bit and, nothing is happening. That doesn't mean we're not still working towards that progress, So yeah, that's my cheesy answer for your amusement park.
It sounds like a great ride.
Yeah. No, it probably sounds pretty boring, but I want people to know that that's what it looks like visually.
I'm sure the kids would want to get on it.
Yeah, there you go.
That one looks safe.
Yeah, right.
Mental health amusement park. And I have a ride. There's so many similarities between y'all's work in substance use and my work in eating disorders and kind of the way that, roller coaster is a great metaphor for recovery. And if I could have a ride that did anything, it would in some way be about a person's own ideal self. And I'm picturing, what's that horrific ride at Disneyland with the singing dolls?
It's a small world?
It's a small world, but instead, here's just your life and your ideal life, and just being able to kind of sit with that and think about that would be something powerful, I think.
And would you call it your ideal self, or would you call it something else?
I would call it something really deep.
It's an ideal world.
Something very big.
After
No,
all.
I dare you. Yeah, something like that.
Fair enough. Any last statements that you would like to share while we have a captive audience?
Ooh. I think, therapy is not as scary as it feels when you're trying to start up. When you actually do sit in front of a stranger, it's totally crazy to sit in front of someone you've never met before and be like, here's everything that I'm insecure about, everything that I feel like sucks about me, But if you're really sitting in front of a therapist that loves their job, that's, been educated, things like that, you're most likely going to be met with a lot of acceptance. And I think that just acceptance is so powerful of, you're actually not crazy, and the things that you're going through are not something that's irreparable.
Yeah.
And with a captive audience, I think just the idea that your therapist is a human being. There's something very daunting about going towards a therapist when they're this thing that exists, and it's not really real. It's
Just some guy.
just another human being.
That's right.
Just some guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a person.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and
A
gentlemen.
really smart person, but yeah,
Yeah, highly educated.
attractive.
We're doing all right. Oh, there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, Beth Snear, licensed clinical social worker supervisor, and Luke Snear, licensed professional counselor. Thank you both for being
Thank
here
you.
tonight.
Thank you.
We break the cycle here every Friday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Tune in next week. It will be our last live show of the year. It's a surprise as to who the guest will be, and that's just because I haven't lined it up yet. But we'll be here, and we'll see you then. Take care.